Muscles, muscles, muscles. Ridiculously big muscles. Alpha dudes being alpha with giant muscles. Sometimes you just miss those old school brawny muscular dudes. And that's exactly what I got watching the Baki Netflix series. So then I watched a few episodes and then they alluded to fights from like a previous tournament. So I was like, well, I better go back and watch the old series. Not that you'd ever be lost story-wise with this show. So I binged all 48 episodes of Baki the Grappler from 2001, and then I finished the Netflix series at an inhuman pace. And if I was to completely analyze or critique it, I would say that the show's pretty terrible, but I had such a good time watching it, for the most part. And as a protagonist, Baki is engaging enough to keep you watching the show. Well, at least in the 2001 anime he is, because he was definitely more of a character in that one. The 2001 Baki the Grappler starts out with Baki as a 13-year-old and his ultimate goal of surpassing his uber-douchey, obnoxious father, Yujiro Hanma, the strongest creature in the world. But there is an interesting dynamic between the relationship with Baki and his mother and father, but, that's not really why we're here for this show. But what we're here for, really, is the ridiculous underground fights and tournaments between superhuman meatheads. And there is quite the assortment of insanely large men, and even the smaller martial artists are still super ripped. The variety of martial arts and fighting styles are abundant as well, but the fights don't really play out in the traditional anime ways. The majority of the fights are seemingly guys trading blows in the most insanely brutal ways and shrugging them off. Half the time you'll see guys' faces get pulverized to the point that you think they died, and yet surprisingly enough, hardly anyone really dies in this series at all. And brute force and power in this world are enough to trump even the craziest absurd martial arts skills. And somehow all that works enough, and I was still fully engaged. I also love the total embrace of this style of action. I mean, the show doesn't try to be anything it isn't. And I'd have to say I think I still like the 2001 anime better than the Netflix one. But the insanity is up to a whole other level in this one. Now, while I was watching the 2001 anime series, I thought it would be kind of a slog and boring to get through, and I was just excited to get to see the newer, better animation style of the Netflix series. But ignoring the cringy CGI fight scenes, I do like the updated character designs a lot more in the newer one. Oh, and speaking of bad CGI, just look at how awful this is. Now, I gotta say that the Netflix Baki kind of dragged in some episodes, and things felt padded a bit more. Now, my excitement was piqued with the start of the most evil death row convicts arc, or whatever it's called, and I was pretty let down. So these 5 death row convicts show up to Japan with the goal of tasting defeat. And part of the setup of this arc is that there are no holds barred, anytime, anywhere, weapons, and any tactics they want to employ are allowed. And this is a great test for Baki and the local fighters who are more accustomed to organized underground fights. But then with all of these convicts, for the most part, they get jobbed and pretty much jobbed again for most of the episodes, and that kind of drags on a bit too. And some of these guys use really over-the-top weapons and bombs and implanted stuff on them for fighting, and it's pretty bonkers. But the cheap and underhanded tactics are supposed to be good tests for our local fighters, and for the most part, they are easily able to overcome these obstacles, and it just feels like a lot of meandering with the convict fights. Baki himself in the newer series is super boring as a character. I mean, his whole arc here is that he finally sleeps with Kozue, and that's pretty much it. Although he does seem to get a power boost out of this. He also sort of cakewalks through all of his fights in this series. But reading ahead with the manga, I do have hopes for this series, and I'm still excited for some of the new ridiculously powerful characters to enter the scene. I've probably spoiled enough of this, and it seems that everything I've said would contradict the fact that I actually enjoy this show quite a bit. You're either on board with this show, or you're not. Sometimes it's just fun to go back to the super macho, muscular dude era of anime. To sum it all up, Baki as a whole is a fun ride, and it's a great junk food anime to tide you over until your favorite shows are back on.